Who is God? How do we know that the God of the Bible is the true God?
Okay. And again, it comes back to what I said. There are many different people who believe many different gods. The only written book which coincides well with science is the Bible. Let me look at it this way. When you think of the great theologians, philosophers of life, who are some of the ones you think of? Aristotle, Plato, Confucius, Socrates.
I was thinking of D.L. Moody.
Well, no, I mean way back.
Oh, okay, from way back, okay.
Yeah. Do you realize that all of the great, whether it be Buddha or Confucius or Aristotle or Socrates or Plato, all of them lived after the Old Testament was written? Ezra predates all of them of the modern religions. Now, the only one that doesn't is Hinduism, which is really a pantheistic view. But of all of the great writings, like Muhammad and the writings of Confucius and the writings of Socrates and all these, are basically recent. So if you want to go by age, the Judeo-Christian is much older, and it is the most, and every other one from that time are mythological. The second reason I believe that God is Jehovah God is I've seen how God changes people's lives. We had in Brazil spiritists who could do miracles. The problem was, I mean, they could heal people, but the person was the same afterwards as before. If he was a sinner before, he was a sinner afterwards. But I've seen God change people's lives. To me, that's an important part too, why I believe that Jehovah God, Yahweh, Jesus are true, because I've seen how they change lives. So there's two things. One is, historically, is the most credible, and and in the matter of its effect upon people, it's the time. There was a man by the name of Charles Townsend, I believe what his name was. He was an evangelist along with Billy Graham, worked for Youth for Christ, and there came a time when he left that and went to seminary, went to a liberal seminary. He left his wife, got married to someone else. He lost his faith. He says, "I can't believe in a God that would allow people to be killed and everything like this." Billy Graham, on the other hand, said he went up on the mountain and said, "I don't understand everything, but I believe, and therefore I'm going to trust you." Lee Strobel wrote a book on A Case for Christ, a case for, I'm not sure if it is that one or not. See, he wrote several books, but in one of those, he interviews this man, Townsend. And he tells him why he doesn't believe the Bible anymore, and goes through all of this. And then he asks them, Lee Strobel asked this guy this question: "What do you think about Jesus?" And he said his tears came to Townsend's eyes. He said, "Everything that I ever learned that was worth anything, I learned from Jesus." And then he made this statement: "Oh, how I miss him." You see, that's where it comes down to. If you have had a personal relationship with Jesus and you leave it, you got nothing left. And you come to a guy like that, and he died soon after that. Is, "Oh, how I miss him," and tears are in his eyes. That speaks to me.
So what is God's name?
God says, the Bible says that his name is I am that I am. That's what the word Yahweh means. The word Yahweh is the word to be in the first person. We say he is. God says I am. He says when he says to Moses, whom shall I say sent me? He says, tell him I am that I am sent you. That's what it says is I alone have existence apart from everything else. That word, if it's in the Hiphil, can mean he who creates or he who makes to be. So it's both are true of God. He is God's name is Yahweh because it means I am the only self-existent being, not just in the universe but anywhere. And I am the one that's created everything else. So his name is Yahweh.
So where does the word Jehovah come from?
The Jews were very afraid of blasphemy, and they believed if they had sin in their heart and they were to say the name of God, it'd be blasphemy. Therefore, to avoid that, they would take the consonants of Yahweh and the vowels of the word Adonai, which means Lord. You put those together, you get the word Jehovah. You take the consonants of Yahweh and the vowels of Adonai, and it would become out Jehovah. So when they would use that word, they would do it that way, Jehovah, rather than saying Yahweh, in case they might be blaspheming, but they didn't. When it's written down, see, originally the Old Testament only had consonants, but the Masoretes, when they wrote it down, put vowels in there so we could pronounce them, so it wouldn't be lost. Because Hebrew was becoming a lost language, and so as long as it was a living language, you didn't have to have the vowels. You knew how to pronounce it, but they put it in. So Jehovah is a combination of the consonants of Yahweh and the vowels of Lord or Adonai.
Where does the concept of the Trinity come from?
It developed over time as the early church fathers wrestled with the fact that Jesus is God and the Father is God and the Holy Spirit's God, and yet there's only one God. In other words, the Bible clearly says there's one God, but it also clearly says that the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are separate, are separate personalities, separate persons. And so how do you put those two together? The Trinity is simply a way of trying to explain how there is one God, but he exists in three specific personalities. The Father in heaven says of the Son, "This is my Son, in whom I'm well pleased." Jesus says, when I send the Holy Spirit to you, he will take of mine and give it to you. Obviously, it's not just modes of existence. There's some kind, and so Trinity is just trying to explain that. See, to me, it's like if you were living in a two-dimensional world, like a blackboard, how could you understand a cube? Now you could try to express it by you take solid lines and dotted lines to try to show the dotted lines means behind, but you wouldn't understand that in a two-dimensional world. It would just be lines and dots. If we didn't live in a three-dimensional world, we could not understand the concept of a cube if we lived in a two-dimension. I see that as how the Trinity is. We know that there is one God, but we also know that Jesus is fully God, the Father is fully God, the Spirit is fully God, and yet they're also in some way separate. We can't understand it because we're not God, but we're trying to explain it. That's all the Trinity is trying to explain what the Bible teaches.
So where in the Bible does it teach that Jesus is fully God?
Many places. John chapter 1 says, "In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God." That word, the word was God. Enarcheon ho logos, Kai hologos proston theon. It says, and the Word was God. Now, literally in the Greek, it says, and God was the Word. There's no article in front of God. There's an article in front of the Word. It says, God was the Word. But we say the Word was God. Why? Because in Greek, you have, just like in English, you have two kinds of verbs. You have the verb to be and your action verbs, like to kill, to whatever. Okay? In English and in Greek, when you have a helping verb, to be.
In Greek or Hebrew?
Both. In Greek, no, Greek. We're talking about Greek. This is in the Testament.
Okay.
In Greek and English, I'm saying. In Greek and English, when you have the verb to be, you have the subject and a predicate, either a predicate adjective or a predicate nominative, right? You don't have a subject and a direct object. The same thing is true in Greek. Now, if you had an article in front of both, that is, the God was the Word, it would mean it was interchangeable. That is that God and the Father are totally interchangeable. In other words, but if you had it with one in front of one and the other, that one that has the article becomes the subject. You know, to us, the second word is the predicate object. The first is the we do by order. They don't. They do it by the article. What it's saying is that because the article is in front of the word, is saying that Jesus is God, but he is not identical with the Father. You know, in other words, the way the Greek is there, he specifically says that Jesus is fully God, but he's not God in the sense that in other words, when Christ died on the cross, God didn't die. But God the Father did not die. That was the whole reason Jesus didn't want to go to the cross. It says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. That word proston theon. One time I was trying to go back and going from English to Greek, and I was trying to remember how, just guessing. And I got to that, and I said, and God was with, and the Word was with God. And I said, oh, what word were you with? Meta. Or sun? Sun means like in the midst of, like synagogue. Meta means alongside. I couldn't figure out what, so I went and looked it up. It was neither of those. It was the word pros. Pros means face to face. In other words, it says, in the beginning was the Word was face to face with God, face to face with the Father. And the Word was God. He's saying there was a sense in which he was separate from God, but face to face with God. But there's also a sense in which he was fully God. So the Greek in John chapter 1 in the prologue clearly says that. Another place, Thomas says, when he's talking to Jesus, my Lord and my God. And there's a number of other places like that. But on the other hand, Jesus, I go to my Father and to your Father, to my God and your God. So there is that distinction between the Father and the Son. There's also a hierarchy in the Trinity. God the Father is supreme. The Son comes under him, and the Holy Spirit comes under him. They're equal, but there's also hierarchy. That's why in marriage, a wife and a husband are equal. But there's also an order there. The husband should be the head of the home, not the boss, but the head of the home in spiritual matters and in family matters. That's based on the Trinity. Jesus says, or Paul says actually, that all things must come under Christ. And when all things have come under Christ, he will turn everything over to the Father, so the Father may be all in all. See, it's one of those things that's a mystery. Jesus is equal to God in every way, but he voluntarily puts himself under the authority of the Father. You follow me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So, what about Christians who believe that Jesus is God's son, but not God?
Like, okay, there's because the Trinity is such a hard thing to understand. You have two directions they go. Well, three directions actually. The Mormons say there are three gods. The Jehovah's Witnesses say that Jesus is a created being. He's not fully God. The Jesus only people say it's just different modes. In the Old Testament he's called God, in the New Testament he's called Jesus, and today he's called the Holy Spirit. See, all of that is because they can't grasp the idea of the Trinity. It's too strange to them. I believe that when we get to heaven, there's not going to be a single person that hasn't got something wrong theologically. I know very well some Jesus-only people who I have no question at all they are born again. I think they got bad theology, but I don't question for a minute their theology. I don't question their Christianity. I just think that they are having trouble understanding it. You take some Catholics that believe that Mary, they believe in praying to Mary. Is that going to keep out of my heaven? I don't think so. They got bad theology, but that's not going to keep them out of heaven. The point is, what do you say about, who do you say Jesus is? That's what's important. He says, who is the Antichrist, John says, but he that denies that Jesus came in the flesh, that he became man and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory of the only begotten of the Father. You know, he says, if you have the Son, you have the Father. So I don't believe that faulty theology will keep you out. It's faulty relationship that'll keep you out of heaven, not faulty theology. If you love Jesus and you are trusting in him alone for your salvation, other things are peripheral.